Welcome to episode 18 of the Amplified Marriage podcast. Can you survive a Jekyll and Hyde? Welcome to another episode of Amplified Marriage. I'm Brian.
I'm Natalie.
Whatever you're doing, wherever you are, have a seat, grab a coffee, grab a tea. We are going to be talking today about...
how to survive a Jekyll and Hyde.
Wow. If you happened to miss last week's episode, we had a really great interview with my mother, Linda. We talked about her journey and the things that happened on her road to divorce. And
some of the warning signs. What went wrong.
Yeah, and things that she saw, things that she wished she had. So if you have a chance, go back and listen to that episode. It was a really good one.
Really raw and honest conversation.
Yeah, it was really raw. And so today what we want to do is we just want to have a conversation with each other about the early stages of our relationship. You've heard us mention some of the things that we've gone through, some of the things that have happened just as part of the story, or some of the things we've been trying to communicate and coach people through.
Our quirks
and our weirdness. But today we just kind of want to break it down and kind of start at the beginning. So when I was born...
Oh my.
No? We don't want to start there? Okay.
Our son would say in the 1850s.
I'm not that old.
When Dad was born.
Yeah, I get old.
All right,
jokes
let's
for
take
my
us
own
back
kids.
to 1999.
What's in 1999?
That's when we started dating.
Oh, yes, back to 1999 is when we were starting to date.
That's right.
How did we start dating?
Well, we met a young adults
At KCC.
group at our church.
Yeah. She's pretty.
And he still does have beautiful blue eyes. I think that's what initially attracted me to you. It was something I had prayed for
blue
because
eyes? Not my huge muscles.
No.
My blue eyes.
It was all about the eyes. And, but I didn't like you.
No, you really didn't.
I didn't.
Do you remember when we went out with my buddy Craig and we were going to shoot pool? And then I asked for your phone number and you dodged it. And then you finally caved in after I asked for the phone number.
That's right. And I gave you a fake number.
You gave me a fake number. That doesn't, everyone who's listening, this does not just happen in the movies.
No. And it took some time. I had just gotten out of a longish relationship. And so there was some wounds and there was some tender areas. And what started off, I think, really at opposite ends of the table, because our young adults group would always go to Boston Pizza for appies afterwards. And so we would always sit at the end of the table.
Apart from each other.
Apart.
On opposite ends.
Right? And then we'd have conversations with whoever we were sitting around. But then after some time went on, we found ourselves at one point sitting side by side.
In the middle.
Talking
to only each other.
That's right. And it was great conversation. And
all other people didn't matter.
No. And then it sort of started from there, I think, where I was like, this person, I like him. Like, not in that way, but as, like, this is someone I can actually talk with who isn't chauvinistic or just out for...
Have I ever been chauvinistic, even after 20-some years together?
I don't think I would ever have classified you as chauvinistic.
Well, that's a good thing. You got one thing going for me.
And you weren't, your intentions were pure. Let's just say that. You weren't trying to, like, finagle your way inappropriately. So you were someone, well, at least you didn't show it at that point. You were someone that was really easy to talk to and really jovial and really outgoing, and I am not outgoing. Unless I'm an introvert until you get to know me. And then I'm outgoing.
Very true.
And then I'm quirky.
Would you say that I was the one that helped you, and we probably never would have talked had I not broached the conversation with you?
100%.
Because you would have just been, he's okay from a distance, but I don't have to talk to anyone because I don't really like to talk to people.
Yeah, 100%. So thus started a 2.5 year dating.
longest dating
I do not
ever.
recommend dating for 2.5 years. That's just way too long to not get into trouble.
Right.
And I mean, we came real close, but we held off, and I'm thankful for that, but it could have been avoided. I mean, there's a reason why, that whole scripture in our younger years of, that was thrown in our face all the time. 'Tis better to marry than to burn. Remember that?
Yeah. We were burning.
It makes sense.
And we weren't perfect.
No.
We didn't have sex, but we sure came close.
Yep.
And it was one of those things that we wanted to avoid doing, but sure was getting harder and harder. And especially the few months before we got married, Natalie moved into a place together. And I had like a 7:00 curfew. I couldn't stay late because it was just, and we're like, no one's ever going to know, but we were like, we would.
Yeah.
And at that point, because we weren't perfect, we were thinking, well, what difference does it make at this point? But that's something we really wanted to hang on to.
Yep.
Be like, this is what we're going to do.
And we did.
And even if we're thinking about it, the justification for it was wrong. Like,
well, hands down. I mean, sin is sin, right? So, I'm thankful that we held off.
Yeah.
In that regard, for sure. Because, I don't know, in my mind, having, like, you had never been with anyone, but I had.
Yeah.
And so, for me, it was just like, meh, what's the big deal? Although, after meeting you and things like that, it became super important to me to not cross that boundary, I guess you'd say.
I think it was because you already had, and I think, did you, when we were early dating, did you struggle with the fact that I hadn't and you did, and you thought?
I felt like I robbed myself because that whole situation was just,
it was pressured.
Volatile, and it was pressured. And with you, knowing that you hadn't, I felt like, and knowing that we were going to get married, I definitely had to walk through some thoughts of shame, and that I robbed you of our wedding night.
And did you ever feel, and at any time before that wedding night, that I shamed you or
never
made you feel less than?
No, this was my internal dialogue.
That was your internal dialogue.
And you had always said, you're like, this, I didn't pray for someone to be pure in that way, even though I had. It was kind of a weird mindset, I guess. But you never ever made me feel less than.
Yeah.
And in our dating years as 19 and 20, I was 19 and 20. I got married when I was 21, and you were 23 when we got married. So it was like, super healthy. I can't think of anything that would have prepared me in my mind for what was to come. Right. So everything going up to the wedding was smooth, I'd say, in our relationship.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember being like a bridezilla or causing undue stress.
You were not bridezilla.
At all. So like leading up to the wedding, I think everything went smoothly. I think,
other than just normal family drama that
well, it was family drama,
but it wasn't you and I.
But it wasn't you and I drama. No. And family as in my family. So like there was a little bit of cray-cray on that side, but you and I were functioning, I would assume, as a normal not newly engaged, but engaged couple, excited to get married, excited to be together, excited for the wedding night and our honeymoon and all of that.
Wondering where the money was going to come from and all that stuff.
Yeah. So, come to the wedding day, there was never a doubt in my mind that I was following through, even though my dad had told me it was never too late to turn the other way and run out of the room.
Really?
Yeah, he did.
I feel like I was today years old when I learned that your dad said that.
Yeah,
Have you been holding that from me?
I guess so. I must have just stuffed it in the back of my mind. But I'm like, that's not happening. I'm marrying this man. He just better not stand me up at the altar. And then...
You know, honestly, I was thinking the same thing when I was standing up there with the boys. She better show up. I'm going to be angry. I'm wearing a tux.
So, yeah. And then our wedding day, I think, went without a hitch.
Yeah.
It was... I could not have asked for a more pleasant... It was stressless at that point, because anything that went wrong, it really didn't matter because I was marrying you. And then we went away for our wedding night. It was lovely, other than the fact that our hotel balcony was directly across the street from the strip clubs
and
downtown.
That night, it was like Harley Palooza, and everyone at 3 a.m. was firing up their bikes and revving them up at 3 a.m. It was hilarious.
The location was not ideal.
But the room was great.
The room was fabulous. And wedding night, and then we had our gift opening the next day, and the very next day, it's like the light switch that was turned off was turned on, and in a negative way. Or
what was on was now off.
Yeah, I guess that's probably a better way of saying it. And thus ensued a 2.5-year battle to want to stay married and to want to continue to love you, even though I felt like you didn't deserve it.
So tell me about that, the day after.
So now remember, we had our own apartment. So we went back to our apartment and I was like, this is great. As newlyweds, like what else do newlyweds do other than have sex all day long? And we had our gift opening and it was just not like that at all. And however I had in my mind imagined newlywed life being, it was the complete opposite of that.
So even after the honeymoon, even after we came back from our lovely...
Oh, we hadn't left for a honeymoon yet.
Oh, that's
Remember,
right.
we left like 3 days later?
Yeah, and we went to Edmonton.
Oh, which, bless you if you're from there, but that's not a honeymoon destination that I would ever want to repeat.
That's not a destination choice.
That's not a destination. That's what do you do when you're young bumpkins and you have very little money? And
your uncle had to help you go away because he blew all your wad on the stinking...
On the wedding.
On the wedding. Even the wedding was cheaper, although we had a nice wedding.
We had a beautiful wedding. But yeah, it was just... So we didn't leave right away.
Right.
But the idea that I had of newlywed life was a fairy tale reenactment, I guess, in my mind. And it did not live up to the movies.
At all.
At all. Actually, it was more like Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right.
Situation, like, quite frankly. And so the day after the wedding, there was a barbecue happening with my side of the family that I'm like, we're not going to that because that's not what newlyweds do with their free time. And you had already made plans with your friend to go up to the Rat Cabin, which I had never been to. And this is straight out of a horror movie where we ended up going. But so right away, it was...
Instead of being married couple and just being together and enjoying that few weeks of wedding bliss, we just immediately the next day, everything changed. It's like I needed to be with my friends instead of with you. And the other, when we were dating, we had found a really good balance between dating and me being with my friends. But something switched. And there's always a question that you're asking me, and you've asked me a few times since then.
I have asked you over the course of 19 years, and actually we just had this conversation today because maybe there had been an epiphany. I don't know.
There was no epiphany.
Of what actually went wrong. Because from dating, which we dated for 2.5, kind of funny actually, I've just made the parallel in my mind. We dated for 2.5 years and we struggled for 2.5 years.
Wow. I didn't actually think about that.
I didn't think about that till right now.
Wow.
But the 2.5-year dating period was very romantic and very like swept off my feet. And you were... you know, the knight in shining armor and whatever. And then the day after our wedding, the switch goes off and you were completely disconnected. Couldn't give a care in the world about my thoughts or my feelings. It was all about you. from here on in,
Yeah. For the next 2.5 years.
as long as your needs were getting met on your timeline.
Right. It was like a cat.
Right. But
It's
I
all
could
about
not,
me
I
when I
could
want
not, what's the word? Like approach for whatever affection, whether it be physical, anything like that, unless it was on your terms, because, typically it's the wife that's like, well, I've got a headache or whatever. And in this case, it was you
Yep.
with a billion and one excuses.
To why we wouldn't have
Yeah.
any kind of
Nothing.
intimacy.
Like we wouldn't communicate. You just shut down.
Yeah. And we moved from Kelowna to West Kelowna, Winfield, no wait, the other way around.
Yeah,
West
we did.
Bank, over the bridge, and we lived in a basement suite there. And pretty much all I did was I worked
And you played video games.
and played video games.
Men, I have very strong feelings about video games when it is a deterrent and a distraction to
From
keep
your wife.
you from your wife and or your children. And if it's the wife who has the addiction to video games,
Seek help.
seek help and reprioritize what's actually important.
Right. There was a statistic that we read about 1.5 years ago. We were doing what we call a grow day. And it was in just a relationship grow day. A bunch of married couples and a couple engaged couples came, and we had Natalie and I were on the panel. And one of the stats was that 2 years ago, whenever Fortnite came out, so it's probably about 1.5 years ago, when Fortnite came out in the UK, they saw a 5% spike in marriages stopping or divorce calls coming
Yeah.
into lawyers because of video games.
Yeah, it's
Because
a real
of Fortnite.
problem.
And so all I did legitimately
Yeah.
was I would go to work. I'd spend my 8 or 10 hours. Sometimes I wasn't even working full time. It was
Yeah.
part time. And then I would go and just
Yeah.
play video games at home until 10 or 11 at night. And then I would go to bed and she'd already be sleeping. And I really don't remember very much intimate times there at all. There's virtually no sex at all.
No,
In that time.
that's right.
And then from there, do you want to add anything onto that time frame before we moved?
So it was one of those. Okay, so we left. We had been married for 11 months
Right.
before we left town.
Yeah.
And in that time, I mean, gosh, we had no couple friends at all, actually. We had a lot of single friends, but we had no couple friends at that point.
Right.
And your sisters were kind of too young still
Yeah.
to like hang out. So I didn't. And so I worked, and I worked opposite schedule
Yeah.
to you. So,
So
I
I
worked
yeah.
as a nursing assistant, and I did graveyards, and you would work during the day, so that we were on opposite shifts.
And why did you do that? Why did you choose that schedule?
Because I chose it because I didn't want to see you.
Right.
And I didn't want to talk to you because it was pointless. And now, mind you, I say talk. At this point, I tried every kind of tactic to get your attention.
Right.
So if it was, a manipulating of the conversation or something to get you to modify your behavior so that you could see, like I tried everything. I tried crying, and the crying wasn't an act. It was legit, but like nothing got through the shell that you turned on right after we got married. And there came like a wall of, you can tell me, and I remember like your eyes were almost glazed over, and I would talk and you would tune me out and you wouldn't listen, and you would bring friends over at all hours of the day. So, if I had planned something special, because seriously, I sought out advice from my parents, and I'm like, what do I do? And my dad gave me some suggestions, and I tried all of that, and it was like, nothing worked. Nothing worked to get you to see me. Like if I was standing in front of the TV, you would lean to the side and ask me to move. Right. And so it was just, I don't know what it was that I could do to get through to you that I hadn't tried already.
Right. And that included all the marriage tricks and all the things that they say to do regarding sex and all that stuff. And then there was communication things. And I just remember,
like we just didn't talk.
I just remember for some reason in my head, it was like 2.5 years of fog. If I think back, and we've thought about this a lot, and we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
If I think back, it legitimately is just 2.5 years of just straight fog, where I wasn't engaged with you, but I wasn't really engaged with church. I wasn't engaged with my friends. I definitely wasn't engaged in my relationship with God.
No.
And the one who's supposed to be the biggest cheerleader in your life was the one that I didn't want to spend time with, or I did want to spend time with you, but it had to be superficial. I didn't want it to be deep because we didn't want to go there. And I say this all the time, and Natalie always will probably, even today, will add an addendum or a little tag to what I'm about to say. The reason the marriage didn't work and almost failed for the first 2.5 years is because of me, not because of her. There is very little that she did wrong when I even think back. And I think back, my fog means when my brain was fogged to you. Right. When it came to how I was going to engage in
work and everything else, you were present and you were there.
But when it came to my relationship, and so when I say 2.5 years, the marriage we'll get to there, but we were almost close to divorce. There was nothing that Natalie did wrong. She did her best to make me dinner. She did her best to be there. She was never super argumentative, even though she's French and sometimes we just attend, and she's passionate about arguing with me. We had some good times in there, but they were superficial and there was no depth.
No.
But there was nothing in me that wanted to engage with her. And I remember we've been talking about internal dialogue with my sister and some of our friends. Mm-hmm. My internal dialogue was, there was always a part of me that's like, what are you doing? But that part would never win out.
Right.
That mental argument would never win. It would always like, no, you do what you're going to do.
Yeah. And we could turn on the charm, and we did.
Oh boy, did we ever.
So behind closed doors, we were those behind closed doors fighters, I guess.
Yeah.
But out in the public eye, when there was people around, because pride gets in the way, and up until this point, it really felt like we had no support.
Right.
So when you feel like all hope is gone, everything that you're trying is moot, like there's no point, then when you're out in public or, at an event or things like that, you put on the charm.
Yeah.
And we could be affectionate. And seriously, as we talked with some of our friends who knew us back then, they were shocked when they found out that we were having problems.
They, at the time, were like, oh, you guys, we thought were relationship goals.
Yeah.
And like, boy, did you have us wrong.
Don't have your relationship goals after our first 2.5 years of marriage. But
maybe not even after our first 10, let's be honest.
Right? No. But go ahead.
So what you were saying earlier when we were chatting, there was a time when we had I want to say this. I said there was emotional abuse, and the fact that I was abusing her as my wife, and the fact that I wasn't engaging the way a man should.
Right.
There was never really any verbal abuse. I was hard on her, but I wasn't like calling her names or.
No, you never name called.
No, and then there was never any physical abuse, and a lot of it was just emotional abuse. And it wasn't that I was manipulating her, because I'm real terrible at that. But I was almost kind of manipulating her to do what I wanted by being as strong personality as I am still. I'm still that strong personality, but I've turned it to for good instead of evil.
That's right.
Right?
And I'm like, you're a big personality, but so am I.
You're quite a large
personality. And I am not afraid of conflict.
That's for sure.
At all.
Especially with me.
Especially with you. And if you brought your conflict game and your conflict face, I met you there.
Yeah.
And it was at that point, I think it wasn't to resolve, it was to be heard and to be right.
And in those times, I didn't think you were heard. I didn't hear you, and you definitely were not right.
That's right.
In my mind.
In your mind. And,
even though,
and I was pressing to be heard to prove that I was right. And it just was this head bashing thing. We were going nowhere. It's like two people being on a treadmill facing each other, and they're running full tilt, but they're never getting any closer.
Ooh, that's a good one.
That just came now too.
We're going to have to remember that for later.
Right? But that's exactly what it felt like for 2.5 years, that we weren't even on the same treadmill trying to help each other up. No. It was
It's like two people fighting. We were fighting each other on everything.
Exactly. We were not coming together. And you might ask, well, where's God in all of that? Good question, because
God was not a part of that moment.
God was not a part of that moment until we came to the end of ourselves.
Let's just go back for just a little bit. I remember you gave me the ultimatum. You said that if something doesn't change by this time, we're going to be moving on to the next stage. I think you meant divorce.
Yeah.
Even though we swore we'd never say that was part of our journey. We would never say that. And
the reason why, I mean, you come from a divorced family. I do not. And so to me, that was the ultimate failure.
Right.
And I remember that ultimatum that you're talking about was like a December 31st. So that would have been
just after your birthday.
Yeah. And so to put into context, 2.5 years where you're like, okay, was it just lack of communication? I mean, there was no physical intimacy. It was essentially celibacy. If we look at that, which is not God's intention for marriage at all, it caught me off guard because when we were dating, we barely keep our hands off of each other. To flip this switch to now where, I felt inadequate as a woman, and I'm like, I had gained a little bit of weight, and so I felt unattractive, and like my mind just went to all the worst case scenarios as to what could have possibly contributed to your pulling away emotionally, pulling away physically, pulling away mentally, like even verbally, because we weren't even communicating. There was no, how's your day? You look lovely. There was no affirmation whatsoever on either of our parts.
Right.
In that whole timeline. So then comes a point, in my own heart where I'm like, I don't feel as though like I've done anything to warrant this kind of behavior.
Yeah.
Now, in a future podcast, we'll probably get to when the Lord spoke to me about my part in all of this.
Yeah.
That'll be a good one. But at that point in the game of marriage, it wasn't made known to me.
No.
I was unaware of my part. And let me tell you, and we've said it before in our podcast, the power of the tongue can either build up or destroy. And I used it as a weapon.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And I was vicious and I was cunning. And I knew exactly the things from your past that would hurt you. I knew exactly when to use them and how to use them in hopes that something would snap you out of it.
Yeah.
And it had the most horrible response. It did not work at all. Right. And so giving the ultimatum that I'm like, all right,
that coming?
On the basis of we are not intimate whatsoever, I will not continue to be married and spend the rest of my life a shell of a human being, unwanted by our husband, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, anything. I felt like you were sinning against God and sinning against me because you were withholding all of those things.
Right.
And so then came the ultimatum.
Right. And then the ultimatum, I was like, psh, whatever, she's just, she's never going to leave me. And then there came a moment where I realized that she might, and I actually panicked a little bit in my heart and probably a little bit outwards, because one time she packed up and she left. She sat in the car for an hour, and in that time, everything went through my head, and that even then, that didn't shift me. And it was this one time you said, I walked into the bedroom. We had just finished having a big argument about this. I walked into the bedroom. I turned around. I walked out into the bathroom.
Yeah.
And what did you say after I spent time in the bathroom?
So earlier I had mentioned that your eyes were kind of glazed over. Yeah. And it was as though the Brian that I fell in love with was no longer there. Mm-hmm. It's like he up and left. He packed his bags in the night. And then I have his evil twin is really how it felt. For 2.5 years. And I remember like, what is going on that you're doing this? Like, do you not even realize that you're treating me this way? And you were I felt as though you were embarrassed to be with me in public.
Yeah.
And your own coworkers thought you made up the fact that you had a wife because none of them believed. No one had seen me. No one had ever heard of me.
Yeah.
You know, I was not allowed to just show up at your work. Like, you had all of these barriers and boundaries put in place. Part of me thought you were cheating on me.
Yep.
Because it's the only thing I could think of that logically, tangibly made sense as to why we were in the predicament we were. And then part of me was like, maybe he strung me along. And I think I remember telling you this, where I thought, maybe you're not interested in women.
Yeah.
And you strung me along, and now I'm finding out the most horrible way ever. And so there was that element that had popped into my head, because I'm like, nothing makes sense. Like, if men are built visually and they can't, like, they're built to be physical with their wives, and this isn't happening, what could be the reason
Right.
that this is not happening?
Yeah.
And so my mind just went every which way. I'm thankful that I did not choose to be unfaithful to you in the midst of all that nonsense.
Yeah.
And I'm extremely grateful that you were interested in women, and me particularly. And I'm really grateful that you didn't go the route of, like, it wasn't an unfaithful situation that kind of launched.
No. And so you said, I mean, I went into the bathroom and then I came out.
Right. So you were glazed over for
2.5
years. Literally the day after our wedding. I remember thinking, who is this man? And what? I was like backpedaling really fast.
What have I done?
And how can I fix it?
Yeah.
And he had walked in. It was probably, so at this particular ultimatum, like, we had company coming down because it was the end of December and stuff. So we were going to put our A game on. But I told him, I'm like, company's leaving on this day and you have until this day. And so we're not playing games anymore.
Right.
And you walked in the washroom probably a week or two before company came, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And you walked in, and it was just your usual arrogant, pompous, jerky self walked into the bathroom.
Wow.
And I don't know what transpired from the moment, because it wasn't a long time that you were in there. And when you walked out, you walked towards me. And I remember thinking, well, there's those eyes. There was a softness. Mm-hmm. There was affection. There was the way that you carried yourself was completely like an old dream.
Right.
And I remember distinctly looking at you and going, what in the expletive just happened to you?
Right.
Because you walked in the bathroom your old way, an old, like the new old way, the jerky way.
The jerky way.
And you came out, and the person that I dated and fell in love with is here. What kind of a sick, cruel joke are you trying to play on me?
For the last 2.5 years.
We had words. And you felt as though you couldn't explain to me what actually happened there.
And the truth is I still can't. I remember the conversation I had with myself in the bathroom, clear as day, because I remember the moment that I came out, mm-hmm. You actually started crying. Because you're like, when I said to you, because I think I walked out and the first thing I said to you is, I love you and I am sorry for the last 2.5 years. And I had I remember that. Remember that part. I don't remember much after that, but I remember going into the bathroom and looking in the mirror and being like, God, I don't want to be divorced. I come from a divorced home. Mm-hmm. I know the destruction that it creates, and we didn't even have kids in that moment. Mm-mm. But I love this woman, Lord. I love her with all my heart, my soul, and I'm showing it very, very badly. God, help me be different. Mm-hmm. And it was like a submission in that moment, and it was a conversation I had with myself. And I had to literally, it's almost like the wall crumpled in that moment. And that's when I turned around, I walked out and said, I love you. I am sorry for the last 2.5 years. I've been insert bad word here.
Yeah.
And you cried. I don't think I cried, but I was like, maybe I did. I don't remember. But
See, you
from
were
there,
soft.
I was soft, and I came at it from a different. And from there, it's not that the old way didn't.
Try to rear its ugly head.
But it was essentially in that moment because I made the decision to pursue that which I loved.
Yeah.
And pursue the wife of my youth and begin. And so it was like from there, we had 2.5 years of misery, but we also had like 2.5 years of being dating. That was really fun and really good to work with.
Right.
2.5 years of misery to know, hey, this is what we don't want in a marriage.
Yeah.
And now it was like we almost started dating again, and we started having fun and laughing, and we started praying together eventually. And then we don't do devotions very well together because we have such different styles, but we've learned over the years to live the life together.
Yeah.
And it came down to the fact that I chose to pursue you again.
That's a good mental note. You pursued me with vigor.
Yeah.
In our dating years to get to the altar. And then after that, you were saying even tonight, we were talking that it's like, what's the point now? I've already got the girl.
Right. And I don't know if that was part of the mental process. That's what society beats into you. That's what you see in all the movies. You know, you do all this work for the dating and then you get married and then it's all over. I think that it was 2.5 years of fog. And there's really no reason for it other than I gave in to what society said had to happen, that once I have the girl, I don't need to continue. And so it's been another 17 and a half years of pursuing you again. We've had our ups. We've had our downs.
Yep.
I think that if we're going to, there's a whole nother podcast, there's a whole nother episode in the next 10 years.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that too.
Is the next 10 years of life that changed for us and how we learned how to communicate, how we reached out to see one thing that even if you were to hear the episode of my mom, when she was doing the divorce thing, she was saying she had no one to speak into her life. She had no friends around here. Yeah. She had no counseling. She didn't reach out. We very much live that. And
exactly.
The truth is that we're lucky that we made it past the 2.5 years, that God was able to shake my mind and my heart into something different. And I was able to step into being the man of the house. And again, that's a whole nother thing, but you have to pursue the wife. You have to pursue your husband.
Well, and you have to pursue, I think you said it earlier, what you loved. And you had to come back to that place in your walk with God.
Right.
And I did too, because for those times, you know, yes, I prayed, and yes, I sent out all the angry requests of change him, Lord. And I mean, God in his mercy and grace worked with that.
Right.
Because I didn't want to be divorced, but I also didn't want to continue down the same road.
Yeah. And I think, if anything, we're a cautionary tale. And a success story is a cautionary tale is that if you want to have a successful marriage, and this all happened without us stepping out on each other and us being unfaithful.
No.
And we remained faithful to each other. There was no adultery whatsoever. That's a whole nother layer that we've helped couples. We've worked with couples walking through that. That's a whole nother layer of misery and how we didn't even have that. And it was already hard.
Yeah.
Right? And if you want your marriage to work, you guys need to just turn to each other, pursue each other, and then work your tail off to make your relationship work.
Communicate,
but fight. Fight for each other. Don't give up. And I think that if I think back, Natalie didn't give up. She was getting ready to, because it would have been tiring. I know how I am now.
Yeah.
I'm a lot sometimes because I'm strong. I know what I want. I'm driven. I'm moving forward, and I want to be right. And so I know what I was like back then. I was an unhealthy man. I was not a healthy. I'm a challenger on the Enneagram scale. I was unhealthy. Yeah. And I was not a good leader of the house. I was not a good friend. I was not even a good husband or a good son or a good brother. I was bad at all of those things, because I was so focused on me and not willing to move, not willing to submit and be like, God, you got to do something.
Right.
And make the decision to choose. Yeah.
And we had no support whatsoever. Right. I mean, we had family where we were living, but it just wasn't enough.
Right.
at all. And so it felt really hopeless because, we've had a really hard time finding a church. And then it was like, do we share? And then we found a group that we felt like we could share in. And so we were vulnerable. And with vulnerability comes, the chancing that that's going to be used against you. And in our case, it was.
Yep.
And it did not leave. I mean, it was like just wound upon wound upon wound. Even after we were okay. And then we're like, let's join something that helps couples.
Yeah.
Right. We had decided to stay together. The scales kind of came off of your eyes. We were in like a young adults group. And then just, we felt battered by the people there.
Yeah.
And, I'm actually surprised that we didn't just walk away from church.
Completely.
And walk away. We know many people that it takes less than that for them to get offended with church and with God and to walk away. But for whatever reason.
Let's be clear though. We were upset with God.
We were upset.
And
but
we were upset with church. But that didn't stop us from going.
No.
And pursuing and being a part of.
Exactly.
But then, and there are some of those things. One, God didn't cause me to be a bad husband.
No, that was a choice you made.
That was a choice I made. Just like all the other choices that I made regarding my bad behavior at the beginning, that's not God's fault. That's my fault.
No.
I was the one that has to take responsibility for my bad behavior.
Exactly. And so how you had said, it was all, that I hadn't done anything wrong. And you said, that should probably disagree. Yeah, I do disagree because, even though it did not become clear to me what my role was in that whole entire thing until year 10 or 11.
When we finally reset that back. And
yeah.
Like, we have this really great testimony. Let's use it for something.
Right.
And we started working with couples and be like, oh man,
yeah.
do you remember when we had to struggle through that? We can help. We can pray for them. We can encourage them. Here's some steps you can take.
But it's certainly not one-sided.
No.
Honestly speaking, I know it's easier to put all of the onus on you. And ideally that would be the best case scenario, but it's not the realistic scenario.
Yeah.
It very much was me. I believe that I was 100% of the problem in just how I chose to speak to you, chose to speak about you, the thoughts I had towards you.
But
I'm still accountable for that.
But here's the other thing is that in all of those things, I didn't know how you were talking about me behind my back. I still had to make all those choices. I didn't know what you were saying. I didn't know what you were thinking. One, we're not communicating, so how can I know those things?
All right.
But I'm not... And I will always take responsibility for the first 2.5 years. You can do whatever you want. You're wrong. It's fine. It's okay. I can tell her that she's wrong now and not get into an argument.
I appreciate that, although I know my part in it. And I was not innocent.
But the thing is that really, you didn't marry me thinking that he's going to shut off and I'm really going to have to be the best wife ever. That's not what happened at all.
No.
And so... There's really nothing that you can say that's ever going to deter me from the fact that I'm the one that caused the first 2.5 years to be I'll give you the next 5 after that. If you want that,
right.
You can take the next 5. It's all you. It was terrible. She did all the things wrong.
Yeah.
All the great dinners she had for me and the walks and the love that she showed me. It was horrible. I couldn't believe her.
Well, it was conditional. I'll be realistic. Yeah. It was in hopes that something would, would change. I know you described yourself as walking in a fog. How I would describe the experience of that time was I fell off the edge of a cliff in the dark and I'm grabbing for a tree root or something to hang on to. And it was just a fall that just never ended. Yeah. You have those dreams where you're falling. It was that. It was like that. That's how I felt.
For 2.5 years.
For 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Lordy.
And now we have children. And
I'm thankful that we had no children in that time.
We have a good life and things are good.
Yeah.
And we have a really strong, healthy marriage. But the one thing we've had to do is we've had to find right friends.
Yes.
We've had to find the right cheerleaders in our life to make sure that they're going to cheer us on and call us on our crap.
Yeah.
To push us forward to being better, to find the right mentors in my life, to be around people that are always cheering for you. And
to pursue our relationship with God.
And then pursue your relationship with each other. Don't give up because it gets tough. Right?
Yeah. So that takes us to year... What?
3.
Oh, Lord, we've got a lot to talk about.
We really appreciate you listening. And if you're sitting on your couch today
Yeah.
or on your chair or do whatever it is you're doing, and you're hearing this and you're just feeling like you identify with this,
Yeah.
and parts of this are your story, we would love for you to reach out. We'd love to have a chat with you. We'd love to be able to coach you through, to answer any questions, to give you some advice, to even pray for you.
Yeah. I mean, marriage can be lonely enough.
Right. And sometimes an outside source
Yeah.
can definitely be all the difference. And so if you are that person and you're sitting there and you've been listening to our episodes, and we have them come out every single Monday, but you've been listening to these episodes and something is just hitting in your heart, please
Email us.
email us at amplifiedmarriage@gmail.com. You can reach us on Facebook. You can reach us on Instagram. We would love to hear from you. And if in all of this you have a question or a topic or something that you really feel would be beneficial to you, we want to be here to help you.
Absolutely.
So send us that email, send us that question. We'd love to hear it. And as you have heard us say before, we believe that marriage can be reset,
Refreshed
recharged,
and restored.
Thanks for listening.
Talk to you soon.